Starfield is no doubt one of the most anticipated games set to release in 2023, and arguably the most hyped game from Bethesda Game Studios since they launched Skyrim way back in 2011. It's also one of the biggest and most important games that Xbox will have ever released directly into Game Pass. But will it live up to expectations? Will discovering the galaxy in Starfield be as immersive as exploring Tamriel in the Elder Scrolls? Will the planets be interesting, or should we be worried about the amount of procedurally generated content? Will it be satisfying to create your character? What will combat be like? And what will it be like to build, customize, and fly your very own spaceship? These are just some of the questions I hope to answer in this video. So if you're curious about anything related to Bethesda Game Studios' first new IP in over 25 years, then I hope you'll join me for my ultimate preview of Starfield. Starfield takes place in the year 2330. Humanity has colonized a section of the Milky Way galaxy extending 50 light-years beyond Earth, and it's known as the Settled Systems. Just 20 years prior, two of the galaxy's largest factions, the Freestar Collective and the United Colonies, were fighting in what was known simply as the Colony War. With the Colony War now over, these two factions and subsequently the entire region of the Settled Systems maintain what Bethesda calls an uneasy peace. So, what propels you to explore the galaxy? Well, not long after the game begins, you come into contact with what appears to be a neutral faction known as Constellation. Similar to, say, NASA, Constellation's main goal seems to be simply to explore and do research. They're interested in you because, based on the Starfield gameplay reveal, it appears that you're some sort of space miner, and as you were mining, you apparently ran across some sort of alien or unknown artifact. Just digging up this artifact caused you to have peculiar visions, which is mysterious enough, but apparently there are several other similar artifacts scattered across the galaxy. And that's where Constellation comes in. They want you to help find the rest of these artifacts in hopes that they might help unlock the secrets of the galaxy or maybe even the entire universe. That right there makes them something that could disrupt peace across the galaxy, and at the very least, you're probably not going to be the only one trying to find such powerful relics. Beyond that, we can only speculate about the twists and turns within Starfield's broader story, but one thing we do know is how long it should take. As estimated by Starfield's director, Todd Howard, it should last 30 to 40 hours if you ignore any side content. For reference, Howard estimates that to be about 20% longer than Fallout 4 or Skyrim. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I say that side quests and optional content could extend that experience by at least a few dozen hours. But whether you stay on the main quest or you get lost exploring at your own pace, you first have to decide who you want to be. Todd Howard has gone on record saying that Starfield's character creator is Bethesda's most flexible yet. He's also said the character creation options in Starfield help make it, quote, a bit more hardcore of a role-playing game. And with all the options available, I think he could be right. The character creator is actually the part of Starfield that, so far, has revealed the most about actual gameplay. As such, I'm going to spend a while on this topic, so strap in. As for your physical appearance, we can expect the usual options. Hair and eye color, facial features, skin tone, body type, all that stuff. But one feature I found interesting is the option to select your walk style. This is nice for players who choose to play in the third person. If you didn't know, Starfield lets you switch between the first and third person at any point, except when you're engaging in dialogue, which takes place in the first person. And for what it's worth, Howard has said that first person remains the primary way to play the game. Moving on, it appears Starfield will go some length to allow for non-binary gender options, as the ability to select your pronouns has been confirmed. Now, if you don't want to spend time customizing your physical appearance, you can select from what I'm assuming are pre-existing templates, and if you end up with a character you aren't satisfied with, it looks like you can change your custom or pre-made appearance after starting the game by visiting what are called genetics facilities. But once you do have a look that you like, you're then asked to make decisions that will affect actual gameplay. First, you'll choose a background. These are similar to character classes in other RPGs. From what we've seen in the official gameplay reveal, it appears there are around 20 to pick from in Starfield, and each features 3 different starting skills. The first that we got a glimpse of is the chef. Their starting skills include gastronomy, which lets you research specific recipes and craft specific food and drink items, dueling, which gives you a 10% damage boost when using melee weapons, and wellness, which adds 30 extra points to your health. Next is the combat medic. Starting skills here include pistol certification, which gives pistols a 10% damage boost, medicine, which causes med packs to heal 10% more, and weightlifting, which increases your carrying capacity by 10 kilograms. So yeah, it seems that Starfield will have an encumbrance system, though we don't know exactly what its effects will be. Will carrying over your weight limit slow you down, or will you just not be able to carry over your weight limit? And on that topic, how will Starfield handle inventory management? We'll have to wait and see. The next background we saw is the Cyber Runner, who also starts the game with that pistol certification skill. They also start with a skill called Security, which lets you hack advanced locks and gives your character 2, quote, auto attempts. I'm guessing this lets you bypass the game's lockpicking minigame. More on that later. And finally, the Cyber Runner starts with a skill called Persuasion, which provides an increased chance of success on what are called, quote, speech challenges. Now, I don't think Bethesda has explained these speech challenges explicitly, but in a developer diary, Starfield design director Emil Pagliarulo did say, quote, "We knew we wanted to do some kind of persuasion minigame." Then in that same dev diary, lead quest designer Will Shen went on to describe how the team wanted to create dialogue choices that weren't so cut and dry as right and wrong. Quote, "You have to think about, what's my risk here, right? Which one do I want to choose? We didn't want to have it be a system where there was definitely the right thing to say." And then Howard elaborated even more. Quote, "It feels like you're having a conversation where you're actually trying to persuade somebody of something." Whether these speech challenges and this persuasion minigame are one and the same, I'm not sure, but the idea of potentially manipulating NPCs to get a desired outcome is one of the things I really hope works out in Starfield. Getting back to the character backgrounds, the fourth one we saw is called the Cyberneticist. New skills here include robotics, which causes your character to deal 10% more damage to robots, and lasers, which causes laser weapons to deal 10% more damage. Lastly, we got to see the Diplomat. This revealed a skill called Bargaining, which lets you buy items for 5% less and sell them for 10% more, and Diplomacy, which enables you to somehow persuade target NPCs to stop fighting. Again, these are just 5 of what appears to be around 20 available backgrounds. And once you've chosen a background, you can then choose from around 20 optional traits, adding 3 of them to your character. These also affect gameplay and allow you to customize your playstyle even more. Let's look at the 9 optional traits we saw in the gameplay reveal. First are Introvert and Extrovert. Select the Introvert trait and you'll have more endurance when adventuring alone and less endurance when traveling with in-game companions. I'm guessing the Extrovert trait does the exact opposite. And I do talk about companions later, but for now, know that they are NPCs, not actual multiplayer friends. As far as I know, Starfield is a single-player only game. The next trait we saw is called Kid Stuff, which allows you to visit your parents. Presumably this has some gameplay benefit, maybe a morale boost that buffs your character, but if that's the case, I don't think it's been revealed. The downside is that 10% of all the money you earn is automatically deducted and sent to your parents. Next is a trait called Neon Street Rat, which gives you access to special dialogue options and better rewards for your missions that take place in the pleasure city of Neon, which I do talk about more in a bit. Now, some traits connect you to certain factions or religious groups, and picking one does seem to bar you from selecting other traits associated with other groups. Pick the Raised Enlightened trait and your character will have grown up as a member of a group called the Enlightened. As a result, you'll get a discount at their store, but you'll lose access to another store called Sanctum Universum. And speaking of, the Raised Universal trait ties you to a group called Sanctum Universum, giving you a discount at their store while banning you from the Enlightened store. So it seems that these two groups might be rivals of one another. The next trait we saw is called Serpent's Embrace, which provides a boost to your health and endurance when you perform what's called a grav jump. That said, if you select this trait and don't continue to perform these grav jumps, your health and endurance are lowered. The trait called Spaced boosts your health and endurance while in space, however these stats decrease when on the surface of a planet or moon. And this trait cannot be combined with one called Terra Firma, which I'm guessing boosts your stats on the surface while decreasing them in space. And finally, we saw a trait called Starter Home. This lets you start the game with a small house somewhere in the galaxy, but at a cost of a 50,000 credit mortgage. Similar to the Kid Stuff ability, I wonder how this benefits gameplay. Can you store items in your home? Do you get a buff or a boost for visiting your home? Whatever the case, that's everything I saw about customizing your character, at least before you start the game. But what about after? How can you improve your character once you've begun to explore the galaxy? Let's take a look. Starfield lets you unlock and rank up skills as you play, and they're divided into 5 skill trees: physical, social, combat, science, and tech, each with around 16 or 17 skills. The way they work looks pretty standard. You unlock skills by spending skill points that you presumably earn as you gain experience, either through combat, exploration, or as you complete quests. Once you unlock a skill, you can then complete specific gameplay challenges to rank it up and boost its effect. Of the individual skills we've actually seen, they're all on the combat skill tree. First is called Rapid Reloading, which boosts the speed at which you reload weapons. To rank up this skill, you simply have to reload a certain number of empty magazines. Next is Sniper Certification, which reduces the sway of scoped weapons, and Targeting, which boosts your accuracy when shooting from the hip. Here we see that to increase targeting from rank 2 to 3, you'll have to kill 125 enemies without aiming. We also saw Heavy Weapons Certification, which increases your resistance to damage so long as you're aiming down sights with a heavy weapon. To boost rank, just kill a lot of enemies with, well, heavy weapons. Next is Demolitions, which gives explosives a larger blast radius and causes them to deal more damage, while the Ballistics skill increases the range of ballistic weapons. Now, you might be asking, what do you actually get by ranking up a skill? Well, it seems the initial 3 ranks provide a marginal stat boost, but when you unlock the 4th and final rank of a given skill, you get a much more significant boost. For example, the first 3 ranks of the Ballistics skill each boost ballistic weapons damage in 10% increments, but unlocking the 4th rank boosts the range of all ballistic weapons by a full 30%. Lastly, 2 skills that we saw the name of but didn't get any info on include Marksmanship and Particle Beams. So that's how skill trees work in Starfield, but you can also customize your build and your loadout via a research and crafting system. At designated research labs, you can initiate research projects within these specific categories: pharmacology, food and drink, outpost development, equipment, and weaponry. And while this hasn't been explicitly spelled out by Bethesda, it looks as if once projects are fully researched, you can then craft certain weapon parts, character enhancements, and based on this tweet, spacesuit mods. And looking in even more detail at the weaponry category, we see there are 19 available research projects. These include grip mods, weapon sights, and muzzle mods. Next, we know your ability to research certain projects can change depending on the background you select in the character creator. For example, as I've mentioned, choosing the chef background enables you to research additional recipes within the food and drink category. And lastly, yes, research and crafting will require resources. For instance, the Barrel Mods 1 research project will require iron, nickel, and sealant. But to gather those resources, you'll have to visit all sorts of planets across the galaxy. I'm going to break exploration in Starfield into two categories: outer space or interstellar exploration, and on foot or terrestrial exploration. Let's first look at what it will be like to explore outer space. As I mentioned at the top of the video, the region of the Milky Way you'll travel throughout is called the Settled Systems, and it spans 50 light-years beyond Earth. And while that's relatively small when compared to the rest of the galaxy, which spans over 100,000 light-years, 50 light-years is actually massive in video game terms. The region will include 100 different star systems featuring over 1,000 planets and moons that you can actually explore. And at some point when visiting these star systems, you'll actually be able to fly your spaceship. However, spaceflight in Starfield won't be as freeform as, say, No Man's Sky. In Starfield, you will fly freely around certain planets, as we see here, and this will include dogfights and some other activities I'll talk about in a bit. But one detail Bethesda has revealed is that you won't be able to manually guide your ship down through a planet's atmosphere onto the surface. Instead, it looks like the galaxy as well as individual star systems will employ what are more or less outer space overworlds that let you select which star system and then which planet you want to explore. Once you zoom in on a planet or moon, you can then view it like a globe and pick where you want to touch down. Now, from what I've read, it sounds like this process of landing on a planet will be shown, but via some pre-canned animation, which might be what we see here. But one major plus is that it sounds like you can literally land anywhere on any planet. In the gameplay reveal, Howard was talking about planet Jemison, home to the capital city of New Atlantis, but he expanded from there saying, quote, "You can land in New Atlantis, but you can also land and explore anywhere on the planet. And it's not just this planet, it's all the planets in the system, from barren but resource-heavy ice balls to Goldilocks planets with life." End quote. If you really can land anywhere on any planet, that's pretty awesome. But what's not entirely clear is when, during interstellar and interplanetary exploration, you'll actually get in the cockpit and freely fly your spaceship. Will this only be on specific missions, or will you immediately be flying your spaceship whenever you visit any star system? We'll have to wait and see. Getting back to the system overworlds, there are a few interesting details. Notice how the Alpha Centauri system is labeled as Level 1. I wonder if this corresponds to the system's level of difficulty. Is this Starfield's way of letting you know that you're over or under leveled for a particular system? Next, you can also see how many planets, moons, and outposts a system has, and what faction it's associated with. And as I'll talk about more soon, you can complete a survey of each planet by discovering certain resources, flora, and fauna. And you can track how much of these surveys you've completed on each planet and across entire systems. A nice feature for completionists. Next, when you do zoom in on a specific planet, you can choose your landing site by pressing X, but you can also see other cool details like what the oceans are made of, how abundant life is, and how strong gravity is. On that last one, I wonder if gravity, or the lack thereof, will affect how high and how far you can jump on any given planet. That would be pretty cool. Lastly, notice the option to press the left bumper to scan. I don't know what this does, but I wonder if it's a way for you to find resources, points of interest, or points of danger that might determine where you'd want to touch down. For example, here we see a structure marked on a specific planet. I wonder if this was discovered by exploring on foot or by scanning the surface from this specific view. Let's now look at terrestrial exploration. Once you touch down, it looks like you'll quickly be shown that survey that I mentioned earlier, which indicates what sort of resources a planet has to discover. As for raw materials, you can mine some of these using a laser tool called a cutter. Whatever you harvest will likely be used for researching and crafting, as well as building outposts and customizing your spaceship. More on those mechanics later. You'll also be able to track down animal and plant life. It's a safe bet that harvesting flora will yield materials you can use to craft medical supplies and cook recipes, and I have no reason to think that hunting alien creatures won't also yield useful resources. That said, just because a planet or moon has no fauna in its survey, that doesn't mean you won't run across wildlife. As you can see here, Crete apparently has zero fauna to scan, but it clearly has wildlife. Why this is, I'm not sure. Another thing about exploration that I alluded to earlier is, based on the character traits and backgrounds, we know you'll be able to explore either alone or with a party of companions. We don't know much about companions in Starfield, and I'm guessing most of them will be human, but the one that we actually know anything about is, well, a robot. His name is Vasco, and in addition to providing helpful information about particular locations, he'll also help haul cargo on missions, and with a limited arsenal, he can even provide some basic defensive cover should you run into trouble. Other than Vasco, it'll be interesting to see how many companions you can recruit and how many you can bring on missions. I'm also curious about how similar Starfield's companion system will be to that we've seen in Fallout. Will you be able to romance companions? Will specific companions somehow be able to buff your character or boost your stats if you take them on missions? And will they level up as you work your way through the game? This is one system I'm really eager to see more of. But whether you travel alone or with companions, let's look at the specific planets, moons, and even cities that you'll visit along the way. The first location you've probably seen is New Atlantis. Located 4 light-years from Earth in the Alpha Centauri system, New Atlantis is the capital of the United Colonies. Not only is this the largest of 4 main cities in Starfield, but according to Howard, it's also the largest city of any Bethesda Game Studios game to date. Quote, "We have, 4 main cities in the game, and New Atlantis is easily the biggest city in the game and the biggest city we've ever built. Kind of the capital here in the game, and it has all of the services you would expect." End quote. He went on to say that you can work on your ship in New Atlantis, and that this is where Constellation is headquartered. As such, it's where you'll join their ranks, so we can presume you'll visit New Atlantis very early in the game, and it might even be where the game starts out. The next location we know about is the, quote, "pleasure city of Neon," which was originally a massive fishing platform built by a company named Xenofresh. But after Xenofresh discovered that a particular fish on the planet produces a psychotropic drug, they of course commercialized it. Now, Neon is the only planet in the galaxy where the drug is legal, making this city somewhat of an interstellar red light district. Next up is Aquila City, which serves as the capital for the Freestar Collective, again one of the more influential factions in the game. Based on the concept art, it seems far less metropolitan than Neon or New Atlantis, and based on what Bethesda has officially revealed, its residents all, quote, "believe in the sanctity of personal freedom and individuality." But more interesting to me is that Aquila is heavily fortified by a surrounding wall that protects its residents from what are called Ashta. These are, quote, "alien predators that are a cross between a wolf and a velociraptor." So those are the cities Bethesda has chosen to highlight in detail. But in the gameplay reveal, we've also seen a few planets and moons. There's the dry and desolate moon of Crete, which is apparently home to some sort of research lab where you'll do battle with space pirates. And we also briefly saw a desert moon called Vectra. But it's possible that not every planet you'll visit in Starfield will be alien. In an interview with IGN, Howard hinted that you'll be tasked during your quest with finding what he called, quote, "old Earth artifacts." So does that mean you'll also be visiting Earth? One system you can seemingly visit is labeled Sol, and it's fair to assume that this refers to our Earth's sun. Plus, some observant Reddit users pointed out that this clip shows a planet that looks a lot like Mars, and this structure, or rather vehicle, bears a striking resemblance to a NASA Mars rover. While I don't think Bethesda has confirmed or denied whether we'll be able to visit Earth, I imagine that if we can't, there would be some sort of story explanation as to why. Getting back to the planets we've seen in actual gameplay, one question I have is, why did Bethesda choose to show locations that are so barren, desolate, and in my opinion, well, uninteresting? I mean, we've seen some spectacular landscapes and environments in concept art and even in shorter clips released by Bethesda, and sure, with 1,000 planets, not every one of them can be a jaw-dropper. But it would have been nice to see in gameplay a landscape that featured more than just gray rocks. It makes me wonder if these locations are among the ones that are procedurally generated, and this brings up one big concern, maybe even the biggest concern about Starfield. Just how much of the game will be procedurally generated? Will it be only some planets, or will every planet feature some amount of procedurally generated content? And for the planets that might be completely generated in this way, will they be interesting? Well, Todd Howard has actually addressed this. Well, sort of. He acknowledged that his team couldn't produce every environment in Starfield by hand. But he also said this isn't new for a Bethesda Game Studios game. Quote, "We do a lot of procedural generation," he said, referring specifically to Starfield. But he then immediately continued, quote, "I would keep in mind that we've always done that and it's a big part of Skyrim in terms of questing and some other things we do. We generate landscapes using procedural systems, and so we've always kind of worked on it." Now, Howard did say in that same video that there is plenty of handcrafted content in Starfield. And I may be splitting hairs here, but he did so in reference to dialogue and the quests, not the game's environments. Quote, "We have done more handcrafting in Starfield, like content-wise, than any game we've done. We're over 200,000 lines of dialogue, so we still do a lot of handcrafting, and if people just want to do like what they're used to in our games and follow a main quest and do the quest lines, you're gonna see what you kind of expect from us." Again, I may be nitpicking, but I think it's important that Howard never explicitly said that Starfield has more handcrafted environments than any other BGS game. Nonetheless, as long as environments in Starfield are interesting and they provide fun stuff to do, none of this is going to matter. And yeah, with 1,000 planets to visit, there will be a lot of procedurally generated environments. The more remote and obscure locations might be entirely procedurally generated, and heck, some might even be boring. But I suspect that important side quests, faction storylines, and of course the main quest will often, if not always, take players through some genuinely spectacular, handcrafted environments. In fact, there is one instance, or rather several, where Bethesda is creating those handcrafted moments that they hope leave a lasting impact on the player. In his interview with IGN, Howard was asked whether Starfield will have one of those handcrafted step-out moments, similar to stepping out of the vault in Fallout. Howard replied, quote, "The way the game starts out is pretty set for everybody, so we definitely have what we call the step-out moment, and we probably have a few of them given the scale of the game. The early ones are the ones we do spend time on to make sure it's impactful." Now, speaking of past Bethesda games, this might be a good time to mention that just as technology advanced a lot between, say, Morrowind and Skyrim, technology will have also advanced a lot between the release of Fallout 4 and Starfield. In fact, Starfield is being built on a new version of the engine used to create those games. It's called Creation Engine 2, and in an interview which I believe took place during a developer conference, Howard stressed that it marks a sizable improvement over the previous version. Quote, "The Creation Engine overhaul is the largest we've probably ever had, maybe larger than Morrowind to Oblivion. There are things we do that we still like, the way we build our worlds, the way people can mod it. These are things that I think are fundamentally good about our tech stack, but from rendering to animation to pathing to procedural generation, I don't want to say everything, but it's a significant overhaul." Now, while things like pathing and procedural generation might not sound all that exciting, improving those systems could potentially make for better gameplay. But as for visuals, my personal take is that while the graphics in Starfield do most definitely look like an improvement over, say, Fallout 4, that's still not a terribly high bar, and I haven't seen anything that is a substantial leap forward. That said, there is one feature in Starfield that gamers will use to show off the visuals, for better or worse. Based on this clip, we know that the game will have a photo mode. Okay, getting back to exploration, what exactly will you do on these planets and moons? Well, I've already talked about the survey for each planet, so you will be scanning and harvesting resources. And of course, you'll be completing quests. But Starfield has a ton of other stuff for you to do. For starters, you can actually make planets more convenient to revisit by building outposts. These are modular structures that, according to Bethesda, quote, act as a home away from home. I'm expecting this to bear at least some resemblance to base building in the Fallout games. That said, Bethesda has confirmed that outposts will help with resource generation. And remember the research labs I mentioned earlier? I bet those will appear at outposts. We also know, according to a tweet from Bethesda's official account, that other characters make your outposts run even better. So it sounds like you can hire or recruit NPCs to make outposts more productive. Now, before I move on to factions and combat, one additional thing you'll do in Starfield as you explore is, of course, pick locks. As I mentioned earlier, there is a lock-picking minigame, and it requires you to line up a set of notches in one circle with the gaps in another. Do this enough times and you'll pick the lock. Now, locks do range in difficulty, and we also see that you can carry specific items in your inventory called digipicks. I'm pretty sure you'll need these to pick any lock, as this post on Bethesda's Twitter feed called them, quote, the universal tool to hack all digital locks. Okay, we've covered a lot of what you'll do as you explore the galaxy in Starfield, but one thing we haven't covered are the groups of good guys, bad guys, and everyone in between who you'll meet along the way. As you'd expect from any Bethesda Game Studios RPG, Starfield will let you join certain factions and work your way through their quest lines. We don't know how many factions there will be, but as I've already touched on, we do know of several. First is Constellation, the group that sends you on your mission to explore the galaxy in search of those mysterious artifacts. As far as we know, Constellation is neutral and free of any ulterior motives, though I would not be surprised if that proves to be a facade. Basically, they're what Bethesda calls the last group of space explorers. Next up are the United Colonies and Freestar Collective. Again, these are two of the most influential factions in the game, and while they are at peace now, they were at war with one another 20 years prior to the start of the game. Perhaps we'll see some interesting storylines emerge as these two factions balance this tense peace with their own agendas. Now, I do believe the United Colonies won the Colony War, and as such, according to Bethesda, they're now, quote, the most powerful established military and political faction in the game. They're also headquartered in New Atlantis, and as such, their logo can be seen all over the city. The Freestar Collective, on the other hand, is based out of the less established city of Aquila, though we know they are a, quote, loose confederation of 3 distinct star systems. So they're not based solely in Aquila or even just its star system. We also know they describe themselves as peacekeepers, while Bethesda has described joining the Freestar Collective as a, quote, space western fantasy. Also seen here, one of their bases or facilities appears to be called The Rock. Anyhow, while the United Colonies seem to represent something akin to a formal government, the Freestar Collective seems to be a more loosely organized ragtag group. If I had to choose, I'd pick the Freestar Collective all day. Anyhow, next up is a faction called Ryujin Industries. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If you want to live that corporate life, this is the way to go, as Ryujin Industries is apparently a giant conglomerate. In an official dev diary, we learned that the start of their questline involves applying for a job, then jumping through certain hoops to see if you've got what it takes to join the company. Next is what I think is the most interesting faction that Bethesda has revealed so far. They're called the Crimson Fleet. These are nefarious space pirates, and here we get a glimpse of one of their ships. Now, if you join the Crimson Fleet, the only way out, at least from their perspective, is death.
When you sign up with the Crimson Fleet, no one quits. The only way out is death.
But what's interesting is that you can apparently betray them from the inside. As put by Emil Pagliarulo, who again serves as design director on Starfield, quote, the cool thing about the Crimson Fleet, what if you're a good person and you want to be a good player and you don't want to play as a bad guy? You can side with the pirates, or you can report back to your superiors and be like basically a space cop. Either way, I imagine the Crimson Fleet will have you partaking in missions where you pillage and loot other spaceships or settlements. And sabotaging the Crimson Fleet while maintaining a pious moral code will surely add another interesting layer to what sounds like an already interesting questline. So those are the factions that we know you can actually join. But as I touched on earlier, the traits that you can select in the character creator have revealed some additional factions and/or religious groups. There are the groups called Enlightened and Sanctum Universum, which seem to be at odds with one another, and the trait called Serpent's Embrace is apparently associated with a religion or sect that worships a deity called the Great Serpent. This is a good spot to mention that if you're a lore hound, I can't imagine that there won't be a ton of lore for you to discover in Starfield. Moving on, in a video posted to Bethesda's official YouTube channel, they did mention 3 other dangerous groups that you'll encounter throughout the settled systems. There's a group called the Ecliptic Mercenaries, who are, one would imagine, hired killers. Another violent group is called the Spacers, who I'm guessing exist mostly in outer space. And finally, the House Varun, which were described as a group of religious zealots. That said, whether these are actual factions with their own quest lines or if they just represent enemy groups that you'll run into, I'm not sure. Whatever the case, given what we've come to expect from Bethesda and given what they've shared about branching paths, such as with the Crimson Fleet, where you can either join them or sabotage them, it sounds like factions in Starfield will provide a ton of optional content and replayability. Just consider that Todd Howard revealed Starfield has over 200,000 lines of dialogue. For perspective, Fallout 4 had 110,000 lines, while Skyrim had a mere 60,000. Granted, that's not all dialogue related to factions and their quest lines, but it does mean that Starfield will have a lot of extra stuff to do. And that doesn't even include dialogue for your character, because none of their lines in Starfield are actually voiced. That's right, in Starfield, you're a silent protagonist. But enough about dialogue. You're not always going to be able to talk your way through Starfield. There will no doubt be plenty of occasions where things get, well, violent. Similar to exploration, combat in Starfield can be broken into 2 types. Combat on foot or in your space suit, and combat in your spaceship, aka dogfights. Let's start with combat on foot, where you'll be fighting either humans or alien creatures. I suppose it is possible for Starfield to feature alien races, similar to, say, Mass Effect, but I for some reason find that unlikely. As such, I'm only going to talk about alien wildlife. First off, not all creatures will be hostile. Some will scurry away as you approach, and others, like these giant alien dinosaurs, don't seem to even notice you. As for scary aliens you'll actually fight, we've only seen a few short clips, but they do show a variety of creatures. But what about humans? I'm guessing that people, whether members of rival factions or just bad people in general, will be the most common type of enemy in the game. But regardless of who or what you're facing off against, one decision you'll always have to make is which weapon do you want to use? So far we've seen this smaller machine gun called a Grendel, and we got a glimpse of this double-barreled shotgun called the Coachman. Worth noting, and sorry if I'm just stating the obvious here, but the UI also shows that you'll have grenades on your hip as well. Getting back to guns, it seems they'll be customizable. As I've touched on, the gameplay reveals show that you can research and craft barrel mods, grips, sights, and muzzles, and each presumably enhances your weapon in ways you might expect. The next section of the video also gave us a glimpse of this pistol and what appears to be a pretty heavy-duty assault rifle. And we actually got to see a different high-powered machine gun in action called the Maelstrom. And finally, we saw what appears to be some sort of railgun called the Equinox. This is the most futuristic weapon we've seen, and it makes me think that Bethesda must be playing their cards pretty close to the vest when it comes to the cooler weapons in Starfield. Surely one of the most fun aspects of combat 300 years in the future will be experimenting with whatever sort of technologically advanced weapons are available. For example, I did mention earlier that there will be particle beams, but we don't know what those look like. Finally, based on the sniper certification skill, we know that sniper rifles, or at the very least, scoped weapons, are a thing, and based on the icon for the heavy weapons skill, it looks like rocket launchers will also be available. As for the overall feel of combat, there haven't been any hands-on previews as of the time I'm posting this video, so I can only speculate. But based on the gameplay reveal, it looks surprisingly fast-paced. I for one think it looks pretty good. There are the typical mechanics. You'll be able to crouch and sneak up behind foes, you'll gain experience for killing enemies, you'll be able to quickly loot their bodies, and you can see enemy health deplete as you land hits. But there are a few mechanics that make things a bit more interesting. One is the use of your thrusters. These allow you to jump further and higher, and potentially even hover for a short time. And while we haven't seen the thrusters used outside of combat, it's certainly possible that they will come in handy during exploration as well. Next, here we see what appears to be a scene that takes place in zero gravity. Whether this takes place on a space station or an enemy spaceship, zero gravity combat would be awesome. Also, just like with exploration, combat allows you to switch at any time between the first and third person. And one final note on combat, I think it's a safe bet that your proficiency in a firefight will be affected by which background you choose in the character creator. For example, I don't think it's a stretch that the bounty hunter, gangster, or beast hunter backgrounds will be better for fighting your way through Starfield, while choosing the professor or diplomat backgrounds will be better for more dialogue-focused playthroughs. Okay, let's now talk about combat in your spaceship. While I mentioned on-foot combat looks rather fast-paced, that apparently won't be the case for dogfights. Howard himself described space combat as, quote, fairly slow, especially when compared to more twitchy shooters. That said, it still looks really cool. Here again, you will be able to switch between first and third person, and another element that might make space combat a bit easier is it appears some weapons will be able to lock on to enemy ships. And while combat here may be slower paced, that doesn't mean it will be shallow. Howard revealed some gameplay similarities to another game, FTL, that might add some depth. Now, I haven't played FTL, but apparently that game allowed you to redirect power between systems on your ship to help overcome certain challenges. And, according to Howard, in Starfield, quote, your ship has various power systems. There's a little bit of FTL there in terms of putting how much power into 3 different weapon systems, then your engines and shields, and the grav drive is what lets you jump and get out of some situations that you have to put power to. So it sounds like if you need to boost your speed, you might have to draw power from, say, your shields and redirect it to your engines. We got a glimpse of what this might look like here. On the left of your ship's HUD, you see indicators for LAS, which might stand for lasers, BAL, which I'm guessing stands for ballistics, and MSL, which might stand for missiles. Then on the right, we see the systems Howard was referring to: engine, shield, and grav drive. Based on his quote, it sounds like your grav drive will require a lot of power, but on the upside, it will allow you to jump at least briefly into some sort of hyperspeed so you can quickly get out of sticky situations. Another detail on combat is the icon on the right of the ship's HUD labeled Hull. The obvious guess here is that this reflects the integrity of your shields, but the fluctuating lines outside the ship's silhouette make me wonder if these are physical shields or some sort of force field. Now, before moving on, I have to mention that combat isn't the only thing you can do in your spaceship. There are other options, and this stuff sounds really cool. As put by Howard, quote, it's not just dogfighting. The ship stuff includes, you see it in the video, you can dock with other ships, you can disable them, you can dock, you can board it. There's actually some quests that involve that. You can steal the ship. There's dialogue in space. There are star stations that you can visit. There's smuggling. You know, all the things that we would want. I don't know about you, but docking and stealing enemy ships, smuggling stuff around the galaxy, this sounds like the type of space pirate life I could get used to. And going back to this short clip, I wonder if players who do board enemy ships will have to fight the crew into submission. Anyhow, whatever you do in space, you can't do any of it without your very own spaceship. Similar to building outposts, building and customizing your spaceship in Starfield will be done using a modular system. That is to say, you pick the part of the spaceship you want to add, then choose from the modules available. Want to build your engines? Browse the available engine modules. Though bear in mind, each module comes with its own benefits, drawbacks, and cost. For example, this White Dwarf 1000 engine is Class A with stats in 4 different categories: engine thrust, maneuvering thrust, engine health, and overall health. Also, it costs 14,000 credits and has a mass of 100. The mass is important because Bethesda has confirmed that the heavier your ship, the slower it will become. So unless you want a really slow ride, don't just add every available module, even if you can afford it. Other modules we've seen include landers, cockpits, fuel tanks, and one called an ion beam reactor. Similar to character customization, the idea appears to be that you can fully outfit your ship to work best for your style of gameplay. Do you want a rig that's great for carrying cargo? Or do you want a more nimble ship that's geared towards combat? The choice is hopefully completely yours. But ship customization isn't all about cold hard steel. You'll also have a crew. According to Bethesda, you can hire specific crew members, though what they'll actually do, we don't yet know. Maybe adding a crew member with a specific specialty will allow you to add a certain part to your ship, or maybe other crew members will add certain gameplay buffs to your ship. We'll have to wait and see. It's also possible that these crew members will be made up of the actual companions that I mentioned earlier. Can you say Mass Effect? Finally, you can customize the colors on your ship. Ultimately, building and upgrading your ride is bound to be one of the most fun parts of Starfield for anybody who likes customization. And that brings me to the last thing I want to talk about before signing off. When it comes to a customizable experience, Starfield is being built with modding in mind. In fact, Howard has said he wants Starfield to last essentially forever, and that the modding community is a big part of that vision. Quote, "You have to think in terms of forever, and there are ways to do that that are easier than you think. The easy ones, but they watered down the minute-to-minute and hour-to-hour." Then Howard went on to say, you don't want the minute-to-minute and the hour-to-hour to feel like a grind, and we've experienced games that do that. So part of that for us too is the modding community, that they've been with us for a long time. So it's not that we rely on them per se to add content, but it's part of the vibe of the game where from the get-go it feels endless. So yeah, while we can't predict the future of Starfield, it's clear that Bethesda wants the modding community to help it last long, long, long into the future. So there you have it. That's everything I've learned about Starfield. We don't yet have a specific release date, but the game is set to launch sometime in the first half of 2023. And yes, it is coming to Game Pass for Xbox and PC day one. That said, this is a current gen exclusive, so if you do play it on Xbox, you'll need a Series X or S. Overall, I think Starfield is showing a ton of potential. It may not be fair to expect the same impact that Skyrim had 11 years ago, but that's definitely the hope. And if Starfield comes even close, then it will at the very least be one of the best RPGs next year. And with that, I want to thank you for watching this entire video. If you enjoyed it, consider dropping a like and maybe even subscribing to my channel. And if you want to keep up with me and see what I'm playing, you can follow me on Twitter at QuestModeGames. And finally, I want to remind everyone to never stop questing.